So with that, good afternoon. My name is Nancy Copa, and you are joining us today for the first CEDS Masterclass, the Cornerstone of CEDS U. During today's session, we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of CEDS, but also about the governance, how you can get involved, and what's next for CEDS. Joining me today are my colleagues on the CEDS team, Dwayne Brown, Emily Rang, and Jim Campbell, as well as Ross Santy, who is the Associate Commissioner of the Administrative Data Division, and Kelly Worthington, who's the branch chief of the Elementary and Secondary branch in the Administrative Data Division. She's over the EDFACS office. So we will get started with the history of CEDS. Before we do, I want to do a quick poll. That should be showing up on your screens now. If you can just take a moment, we'll spend about 30 seconds on it, and just indicate what is your familiarity with CEDS. All right, great. So we have about a little over half of you are novices, 27% are apprentices, 12% advanced, and 5% are masters. So that's great. Today's session is going to cover everything from kind of a novice all the way to the master. So there'll be a little bit of everything in there. Also, I want to take a moment and point out that when I asked you this question, I didn't provide definitions for what do we mean by novice or apprentice. Where do you draw the line? That's really the backbone of CEDS. That's what organizations were asking as well, and everybody was coming up with different standards. So in 2009, organizations got together and decided to create a national data standard, which is where CEDS comes in. That way there's a common vocabulary, it has definitions, it has option sets. All of this is already built out in CEDS. The first version came out in 2010. It had 161 elements and was solely about K-12 education. Because of the success of that, the following year, we released a new version which added on early learning and post-secondary data elements. And then in version 3, workforce. So since 2013, CEDS has been a P20W data standard. Right now, we have version 10. It was released earlier this year. Version 11 will be coming out in February of 2023. But with version 10, we are up to 1,785 elements. Ross, were you saying something? All right, so we have 1,785 elements. And we have everything from staff to students, coursework, elements about families, elements about reporting, because many of you do state and federal reporting. So we have elements for that, implementation variables, what is the report date, what's the count date, things like that. We also have learning resources, adult ed, career and technical education. So it pretty much runs the gamut of almost anything in education. On the screen now, you will see quite a few numbers there about CEDS, and want to kind of talk through each column here. So the first column is the community. That's you. Everyone's invited to participate in CEDS, and you're going to learn more about that through the governance and the getting involved sections of this session. But we do have a vibrant community, and we currently have a little over 1,500 members that are participating, either through discussions in the open source community where we're talking about how to build out the data warehouse, or expansions on CEDS, the standard, putting it in the cloud, things like that, or they're participating in work groups where we're discussing how to build out the standard even further. For instance, we just recently looked at post-secondary and early learning and went through what's already in there versus what might be needed for the field. As the field continues to evolve, we need to ensure CEDS is evolving. And so we have those work groups as well. We do have 43 of the 50 states that have participated in one or more of our work groups, and look forward to the remaining 7 also joining a future work group. As far as the standard itself, I already talked about that we have over 1,700 elements in the standard right now. There will be additional ones coming out in version 11. Many of those were from that early learning work group that I just mentioned. In addition to that, we have, it says 24,895. That's quite a big number there. And what that is that includes the fact that we have definitions for every single element and then all of the options within those elements. So all of the ways that you can, pieces of data that you can capture using CEDS. We do have a set of tools for CEDS, namely Align and Connect. Those will be discussed in the next master class coming up on December 1st. But we wanted to point out today that we have over 4,000 users who have created an account and have used or are currently using the CEDS tools. They are free to anyone. And you only need an account if you want to create your own Align map or your own connection. You can go and look at any of them that are publicly shared at any time without an account, but we have over 4,000 users that have created one. And then finally, the last number there on the slide is that 1249. That's how many connections have been created. And connections are ways to define and operationalize metrics, reporting requirements, research questions, indicators, anything like that where you want to take a question and then determine what are the elements necessary to look at in order to answer that question, and how do we put those elements together. That's what a connection is. So there's 1,249 existing connections in CEDS. So that's kind of the history in a nutshell there on CEDS. Now we want to turn it over to Dwayne Brown to talk about the governance. Dwayne?
Thanks. Let's dive into governance here. So CEDS is a P20W national data standard. And that short phrase right there is actually chock full of information. So P20W, first off, CEDS is comprised of a rich and ever-expanding set of education-related data elements from birth through workforce, and even some great extras that are just thrown in there, like credentials, competencies. We have assessments, we have facilities in those domains. So definitely a P20W rich set of data elements that are available. It's national. It's funded through the National Center for Education Statistics. It is a data standard. Because it is national, it is the go-to standard when looking for elements and definitions across P20W. As mentioned in the previous section by Nancy, it contains over 24,000 standard elements and options, providing a robust vocabulary for every form of data use, from data collection through data storage, through data use. So definitely a robust vocabulary in that. CEDS is driven by stakeholders and is transparent. Every proposed element and option addition or change is documented in the open source community. It's there for all to view. It's there for all to comment on. It's there for all to influence. And it is stakeholders who ultimately drive what happens next inside of CEDS. CEDS is not a closed community. You don't have to become a member to propose new elements. You don't have to be part of a committee to weigh in on proposed changes. Anyone literally can propose changes to any of the CEDS resources, and then anyone can provide feedback on what is actually being proposed. So we're going to take a look now at some of the steps to see how this takes place. All right, so we have 8 steps here. Any stakeholder who wants to see a change in CEDS first submits a ticket to the OSC. Now, what this entails, you don't have to know what you're doing to submit the ticket. You don't have to know how you're going to solve the challenge. You don't have to know the definitions or how you're going to craft the element names. You simply have to know, look, I need this added for the work that I'm doing, for whatever the use case is. This is what I need. And the issue is a good way to introduce to the CEDS world what it is you want to work on. Right? No one knows that you, as a stakeholder, are needing this. You introduce the ticket. Now everyone knows, right? This is what I need to work on. And it's a way to introduce to the CEDS world that kind of information. For instance, Mississippi is looking to add elements related to salary schedule and to school board members. North Carolina is looking to add information or elements related to student permissions. Michigan's looking at vacant positions and data around that, and vacant positions at the LEA. So it's stakeholders that drive what is actually happening next, right? They start that conversation with step 1. Here's what it is we need. We have a kind of an idea of what we're looking for. Come join us in how we define this out and how we get this added to CEDS. So that's step 2. Step 2 is where you begin to work directly with stakeholders to get input. CEDS can help you advertise the work groups. You can start the work group. All work groups are open for anyone to attend. And basically, it's stakeholders getting together to start to have conversations. How do they look at this type of data? You know how you do it in your particular agency or organization, but how do they look at it? How do they have that stored in their systems? How are they using it? What reports are they recreating? What research are they doing with this particular data? How does it inform the work that they're doing? And so the conversations really begin here in step 2. Now that you've introduced that you have this need, the stakeholder community can come together to start to talk about that. In step 3, you literally develop a proposal with those stakeholders. This is it. This is what we're going to create, and this is what we want to add to CEDS. Here's the element name or the option names or the changes we want to make. Here are the definitions, how we see this being used, how we see it interacting with other elements. And CEDS team can help with the guidance around standard naming conventions and crafting complete definitions, but it is a common standard. And so it's stakeholders coming together to form that proposal. One of the requirements that we have within CEDS is that at least 3 separate stakeholder agencies or organizations or vendors or whoever, just 3 separate entities would come together, at least 3, as the proposal is formed, so that we have some commonality and we know that there's been some discussion taking place. So the proposal is drafted. And then steps 4 and 5 is where the CEDS team steps in. So if you take a look, steps 1, 2, and 3, other than helping you advertise, you really don't even need us. You all can work together and get all of these things accomplished in creating the proposals. We help with training and helping you to understand. But until step 4 and 5, you can accomplish all of that on your own. But steps 4 and 5, where CEDS team steps in, we review the proposal. We want to make sure that the change obviously meets the CEDS standards. Standard naming convention, standard definitions, as I had mentioned before. And then we also work with the stakeholders if any changes need to be made or considerations, and they can review those and kind of head back to step 3 if any changes need to be made. But ultimately, at steps 4 and 5, if it all looks good and we don't see any issues, it's your standard. We post it for the entire community to review. So it's out there now in step 6. Where it's opportunity for anyone and everyone to weigh in. So literally anyone can see exactly what you've proposed now, and they can make comments on it. They can put red flags, they can disagree, they can agree, they can do all manner of things right there in the open source community related to that. They can ask questions about it to get clarification, which we've seen in the past as well. If there is any red flags that are raised, then that stakeholder goes back and works with you, kind of back to a step 3, where you recraft and take a look at the comments and things that they've weighed in on, and maybe make some adjustments or changes or clarify with them, ultimately getting us back to step 6, where we don't have any kind of red flags anymore. So at step 6, it's all good. If it's all good, in step 7, it's basically approved. There is a window of time For step 6, we have a 30, 60, 90-day window. 30 days for basic bug fixes. We forgot a comma or we misspelled this word. And then also for some standard option set things related to, for instance, SCED codes. Those are developed by someone else. So if there's a new version of SCED, which has actually come out, version 10 came out, we will just adopt those straight. And we have a 30-day process for reviewing that. 60-day process for anything new, any new elements, any new option sets, basically almost everything else we do, unless it's a breaking change. So if anything's going to be broken, then we have a 90-day window for that. And that is if we change anything in an element name, or if we change anything in an option set code, because those represent breaking changes within CEDS. So that's a 90-day review. So after step 7, after the 30, 60, 90-day window, it's approved by the community. And basically in step 8, it is released to CEDS. And that release comes in various forms yearly. It's released in version updates on the CEDS website, but it's also released intermittently throughout the year in the integrated data store, into the data warehouse. Once approved on the OSC site, it can be utilized in any of the different resources that exist within inside of CEDS. So that is the process.
Dwayne, can I stop you and just provide a quick example here?
Sure.
So in the early learning work group, we have been having meetings about elements, and this really goes back to why it's so necessary to have stakeholder input throughout this process. So someone had proposed the element teen parent, and that's all the information we had. And so the early learning work group had a conversation, and we had to really drill down into, are we talking about we need an indicator saying yes or no, it's a teen parent? Do we need to know the age of the parent? Like, what exactly do we need to know? And then after that, having that conversation, we then had to think further about it into, okay, well, now we know we want a yes, no on the teen parent element, but from whose point of view? Because a parent may be a teen parent with one child, but then has exited the teenage years by the time they have their next child. And so putting that flag on the parent would not work. Instead, we needed to do it from the child perspective, because research shows that being the child of a teen parent can have an impact on your educational outcomes. And so all of this was determined because someone proposed an element, right? Teen parent, but then we had stakeholder input in this particular case in the form of our work group. But as Dwayne mentioned, it may be a work group that you stand up with stakeholders, and the CEDS team can help you pull those stakeholders in to have those conversations and really tease out, we understand the concept you're talking about, but exactly how are we going to define this? From whose point of view should it appear, right? Child versus parent kind of thing. And are there option sets like yes, no? Is it something where you can put anything in? So all of that kind of conversation is what's so necessary in that step 1 and 2 before developing that proposal. So I just wanted to throw that example out there.
Great, thank you. Yes, a ton happens in step 2. Once you hit step 3, you're pretty well done. It's just a process then at that point. If you've done really well in step 2 and involved a lot of stakeholders, then step 6, where they're getting the feedback from GitHub, there might not be much to take place because you've crafted it so well and have looked across various different standards organizations and different stakeholders who collect or use this kind of information. So yes, a ton of work inside of step 2 inside of that. All right, so anyone can participate in any CEDS work group. It's open for anyone. We try to make it as open as possible. We generally look at 3 levels of participation inside of the work group. So I want you to feel comfortable that you can participate in the work groups. The first level is just to gain knowledge. So feel free to come and just show up to any CEDS work group. You can let the organizer know, I'm just here to learn. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know anything about this topic, but I want to watch the process. I want to see what happens. I want to learn more about CEDS. So I'm showing up to just listen in, and you are totally welcome to do that in any of the various different stakeholder work groups and things that take place. So listen in, great way to learn about CEDS. The second level is you're there to influence, right? So you have a stake in this. What we're developing inside of CEDS, what all the stakeholders are developing in the various different work groups, if at some point your organization is going to utilize portions of CEDS, either from an implementation or from the vocabulary standpoint, you may want to influence what's taking place there. You and your own agency or organization have unique needs and unique ways of looking at data. And so your opportunity to be inside the work groups is to influence how that proposal is actually going to be created. And we want your opinions, right? The stakeholders who are working these, you have opinions, and they're generally good opinions because it's how you perceive this vocabulary. It's how you perceive data and how you've interacted with data through your agency. It's how you've grown up in education space and learning about data. So your agency, your organization, it uses data, and so you bring value to that conversation when you chime in about the use cases. So definitely need the influencers inside of there. And then the third level is those who are actually going to be developing. So you're literally going to be the ones creating the element proposals, the element definitions, working with those stakeholders. You're going to hand the proposal over to CEDS. Here's what we got. Here's what we are doing. So you're actually developing that work. You're going to be updating resources for various different ones, like the CEDS integrated data store or the data warehouse itself. You're going to be looking at the architecture of those tables. You're going to be influencing the CEDS ontology and JSON schema in the work groups that are taking place. You're literally developing out these structures. So we have Michigan, right, who's developed out portions of the warehouse. They've literally built and architected the tables. We had Maine doing the same thing around the finance portion. We had Colorado doing portions of that around adult education. We have Mississippi and South Carolina creating portions of the JSON structure and the ontology of CEDS. So there's development work taking place. That's the third level of participating in these work groups, right? So just come and listen, come and influence, come and actually make products that CEDS stakeholders are going to be able to use. They're going to be using what it is that you build. So participating in the work groups. And then finally, who decides what work groups are created? What says it up there? You do. You can 100% on your own create a work group. You can have the CEDS team help you to advertise. You can also suggest new work groups for CEDS to coordinate. The CEDS JSON work group that meets every other Thursday, for example, was a result of a request from Mississippi, South Carolina, and Michigan. And you can note that small bullet point down there at the very end that the priority is determined based on the needs of the field. That applies to the work that CEDS is asked to coordinate, right? So there's a certain number of us available to coordinate various different work groups that take place, and we do it based off of the priorities that we see from the field. But nothing holds you back from starting and coordinating your own work groups. So your ability to do steps 1, 2, and 3 completely on your own without needing CEDS or the CEDS team specifically is something that you absolutely can do, is to coordinate your own work groups, have discussions, create those proposals. So for all of this governance section that we've talked about here, it's really designed to move at your pace, whether that's fast or slow. It's designed that you can take it and run with it. And that's what we want you to be able to do. You may need us to help with some of the training, to help teach you some things. And we're continuing to try to produce more documentation so you understand the requirements for naming conventions and definitions. We have things up posted in various different areas in the open source community to help explain some of that, and are continuing to produce more. But ultimately, we want you to know that you drive the changes that occur within CEDS, and you are the ones that are actually setting the direction that CEDS takes. Now I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talking about how to get involved.
Thanks, Dwayne. So we've heard some great thoughts from Dwayne and information about the governance. You all have some history of CEDS. Now, if you want to take some action, how are we going to do that? No matter if you are a novice, an apprentice, or an expert, or brand new to CEDS in general, there's many ways to get involved. So we were just listening to Dwayne talk about a few of them, but this calendar to me really illustrates just how prevalent all these opportunities are. So this is just one example month of the available meetings, work groups, and activities that CEDS has. And if you don't see something on this calendar that like really speaks to you and you want to get involved in CEDS and you've got a particular topic or a particular item you're interested in, as Dwayne just mentioned, you can start your own work group, or you can start your own meeting group to collaborate on some shared work around CEDS. If you let us know in CEDS what that is, we will help advertise it for you. We'll get it added to this calendar, and we can help you find other like stakeholders who are interested in building out or doing or reviewing the different things or opportunities around CEDS that pertain to you and to your topic. In looking at this calendar, I want to point out just a couple of really key meetings that I think are important. So you can see on November 7th, we had the Open Source Community Monthly Review Meeting. That's like the main meeting. If you want to join something and you're not sure what, that OSC monthly review meeting has a lot of opportunities to just sort of like hear in general what's going on. It's held the first Monday of every month, and it's where important governance components are announced. So you heard Dwayne talking about all of the different steps, and there's a certain time period once something has been added to a ticket has been added to the open source community, and there's certain actions that CEDS has to take. That's where those announcements are all made, is in that OSC monthly review meeting. The other thing I want to point out is you can see we've got quite a few work groups. Several things were mentioned. So Nancy was talking about the early learning working group. You can see there's a couple different subgroups on this calendar associated with that. The JSON XML work group. There's an EdFax work group. Something I want to mention there is all of those work groups are open to everyone. So even if you haven't joined a prior work group and you're interested in hearing, listening, participating, or in one of those ways that Dwayne talked about, maybe you have something that you want to develop or contribute, go out to the calendar, select that work group, and you can see exactly how to join those work groups. Come and join us. If you aren't really maybe ready or feeling confident about joining any of the meetings and you'd prefer like some other type of notifications, CEDS can help with that too. So a couple other ways that you can stay connected and involved with CEDS, like the latest notifications, our newsletters, and other important updates. You can start with the communities page. So the picture on the left, the communities page has the calendar information that we were just looking at. You can kind of see it in small on the bottom of that screenshot. There's also all of the CEDS newsletters are posted on that CEDS community site. You do not have to be logged into the community site to access and see this information. However, if you want to receive notifications about new publications or documents that are posted, like maybe the newsletter, you can absolutely, we would encourage you to sign up, create an account, and that will make sure that you have access to that information via email. So you don't have to join a meeting, but you can stay up to date just by leveraging that community site. So the one on the right, the picture there is of our GitHub site. So Dwayne mentioned the open source community tickets, and this is where all of those tickets live. Now, some of you have probably used GitHub before or have had some access to it, especially our experts out there. But if you haven't, GitHub can be a little bit tricky to navigate at first until you get the hang of it. So because you joined this webinar, we're going to have a little interactive activity for those of you who would like to follow along with me to go over to the GitHub site and see how you can sign up to join receiving some information about CEDS. So put the link to the GitHub site here in the chat. And when you land on this page, it's gonna take you to the Common Education Data Standards main page. first thing you need to do for GitHub in order to receive notifications is you do have to create an account. So I'm not going to go through the steps to create an account, but there's a feature up here on the right-hand side that lets you create an account. One thing I want to mention is that if you create an account on the GitHub site, your information will not like sign you up for some sort of GitHub spam or anything like that. I can tell you that for several years, I have received only the information in an email that I've asked for from GitHub. So one of those things that's really nice. GitHub is, primarily used as an open source community tool for developers. And in this case, because CEDS kind of spans two different spaces here, it's a great way for us to access ticketing information and to be able to, again, follow along with all of the latest happenings. So once you have an account, you can see here on this top corner here, I can actually follow everything happening with CEDS just by clicking this simple little follow button, and it'll keep me up to date with what's going on sort of more generally. The other thing you can do, which I would encourage you to do, is to think about what your role might be or the things that you're interested in related to the CEDS standard. Sort of the base one is the CEDS elements, right? So Dwayne talked about the different ways that tickets get entered and new elements or option sets can be addressed. That's on that CEDS elements repository. So again, if you're not familiar with GitHub, the repositories are just a way for organizing the different areas of CEDS that we have tickets and information. So the elements option is what we're going to choose today. You can see, though, that there's also a repository, and you would follow these same steps in order to do the repository to sign up for information about other repositories. So there's the integrated data store, the collaborative exchange, the data warehouse, and the data warehouse Parquet edition. If you're interested in more of the technical aspects of the things I just talked about, please join us in our CEDS webinar series part 2, which will be in 2 weeks, and we'll go deep into the tech stack. So follow along with me if you have your browser open and click on that CEDS elements option. And so from this page, again, do not be intimidated by any of the information here at the top. If you are feeling uncomfortable about that, the information as you scroll down will tell you more about this repository and the elements. And if you want to follow along and receive email notifications about what's going on in here, which I would highly encourage, you come to the top, almost top gray bar on the right-hand side and select the watch option. By default, you receive notifications when you're logged in if somebody mentions your name, just like in Teams chat or in other chat options. But if you want to receive information about all the activity happening in here, you actually would receive notifications by selecting this all activity option. And now you can see I have the option to unwatch, but I'm currently watching this particular repository. So I'm now going to get information and notifications when somebody adds or changes something in this list. So we'll go back to our, hopefully you were able to follow along, and we'll go back to our presentation, because it might be that you've done all of the entries, you've signed up, you're going to the meetings, but maybe you still aren't finding what you're looking for. CEDS can still help. Contact us, reach out to us directly, ceds@ed.gov, pretty simple email address, and we can absolutely help you either find what it is that you're looking for, walk you through particular steps, or let you know if there's how to get your work group added to our calendar. So now that you've heard all about how to stay connected to CEDS and the importance of your role, your critical role in the work CEDS does, we're now going to hear from Ross Santy, the Associate Commissioner, about the future vision for CEDS. So take it away, Ross.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and Dwayne, and Nancy, and everyone. And to all of you on this session today, thanks for joining us and taking some time. I know it can be pretty overwhelming. It's taken a few of us at NCES quite a while to really understand the implications of CEDS and what does this mean for us going forward, and what does it mean for education in the lowercase e, not the Department of Education, limiting it there going forward. So I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on that. And so there's an important sort of concept to think about in this. And CEDS, like so many things, it's always evolving. And if you look on the left of this slide there and we think about it, you know, we've evolved in response to user needs. Right? When we first started CEDS, it really was all about data dictionaries. And for many users, it still is. That's because it's critical. You cannot know how to make use of a standard unless you know how far off or right in alignment with that standard you and the data that you manage might be. This also helps to just reinforce a core data governance principle that in all of the statewide longitudinal data system grant work and the other things that we've done, we've always tried to reinforce if we see that it's not there, which is start by knowing your data, right? Have a data model, understand what it is you are working with and managing. All of the great use cases, especially if they're coming from current leadership or if it's coming from, you know, a group of you know, experienced long-term teachers in your state or district or your faculty at a post-sec institution, whether or not you can meet those needs is going to really start and end with how well do you really understand the data that you're managing. And so that's where we get most people started. And, you know, that was what the Align tool was about. An alignment is really a matter of taking your data dictionary and mapping it one-to-one to the elements that are part of the standard and documenting the places where what you are collecting and managing and using is directly aligned with the element as defined in the standard, to the definition, to the option sets, and where is it not aligned? You know, we've got something similar here, but it's not the same. Once you understand that, trying to understand ways of leveraging not just your data, but the work of others who could be partners becomes more and more important. And that's really where, sticking on that left side of the graph, or of the slide, we go from there, because the conversation evolved out of the Align tool and really getting people focused on connections. And this was our next big tool that we really focused and tried to drive a lot of use on, is the Connect tool within the CEDS website. This is where the conversation evolved to start to better address what people were doing with their data. And this is a variety of CEDS users over the years, state education agency folks, local education agencies, post-secondary institutional researchers, a number of people, external researchers, whether they are aligned with associated with an institution, or whether they're just independent researchers, and then solution and software providers as well. Connect and the Connect tool, the connections that are in there, it's really about transparency. What is it I'm trying to accomplish? And what data am I using to get that done? Whether it's helping as a software company, helping explain what data your tool needs in order to produce the dashboard that maybe got everybody interested, or the report, or the data service, whatever it might be. You know, there's got to be an ingestion point, and the connection is what helps people to understand and keep that transparent. So Connect really is about transparency. We want to help clarify for everybody who's part of the CEDS community how education data are being used. And as we've done that, we get to that third bullet on the left, right? We're now really trying to figure out how we can get and help build ways of efficiencies, ensuring consistency with a focus on how these uses are getting addressed. A lot of people will just throw out the big heavy buzzword of interoperability when talking about this. And interoperability is a critically important step, but you can't jump too early to that. That's why, you know, we really do get people when they come on board to sort of talk to us as being novice CEDS users and wanting to understand how to, you know, really work with the standard. Start with an Align map, think about core use cases and get some connections, and put your time to that. And then start thinking about the things that will help move the data in a standardized and efficient fashion from wherever it might be to wherever you need it to be. And that's really when we're talking about what interoperability is and could be. And there are lots of things that we're currently looking at and continuing to evolve. You know, along the way, we've helped develop some CEDS data stores and a data warehouse model. And we're talking now about SQL structures or Parquet files and JSON files, a number of very technical things, right? And this is really what we want. This is the discussion we want in the open source community, driven by what's the use case? What's the thing everybody or the set of individuals or a reasonable group is trying to accomplish? Start by understanding and defining your data, move towards documenting how you're using it within specific use cases, and start thinking about how to make that more efficient. So as you get to the middle or the center of this slide, right, what we want to do from this point going forward is support tools that are built around this consistent, transparent use of data. Generate is one example of one of these tools. It's something that has grown out of a U.S. Department of Education Technical Assistance Center related with the implementation of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it came out of a center called the Center for Integrating IDEA Data. But it is not limited because it's rooted in the Common Education Data Standards and in the structures through alignment maps, through defined connections. It's rooted in the full data structure of CEDS. It's not limited to IDEA data. So how do we use it to do more things? Its primary purpose as a tool right now is helping with federal reporting. But once the data are organized and standardized, what else would education agencies or post-secondary institutions, if they were to be looking at Generate, what would they like to do with it? That's the conversation that we would love to help move forward. I mean, as NCES, the more I can get people utilizing consistent, transparent, high quality data for more and more purposes, I know that's going to improve the information we get on our end to increase the accuracy of the statistics we put out. That's great, but that's certainly not the end all be all of why we're doing this. It gets back to our data at the top of that data food chain, for lack of a better phrase, gets better when it's driven off of data that has a core and important use to the people earlier on, the people on the ground in the field doing the educating. And so the more we get a collaborative community discussion going with that, that's what we want to figure out, right? So what other tools, what agencies or institutions, private schools, we don't have many private schools really engaged, but we got a few. What would they like to see develop in this arena of education data? Certainly, since I'm talking here about CEDS vision, if you ask me, who is CEDS for? My answer has always been, it's for the institutions doing the educating. That's not to say the software providers, the solution providers have no role or no voice. They absolutely do. We need them in the conversation. But the priorities for CEDS should be set by what the education organizations need to do with their data. CEDS should be helping by enabling that consistency and transparency while also getting to the point of helping improve the efficiencies. We can't do that without engagement from a diverse set of partners that engages all the different types of people who are currently helping and working in the space of education data, from schools and districts, post-secondary campuses, state systems, whether they be state K-12 agencies or post-secondary coordinating boards, software providers, other standards who are focused on very specific pieces of the education system. We've done a lot of work with EdFi at K-12, with IMS, who does a lot of content delivery and assessment and other things, and trying to make sure the connection points between CEDS and what they do are clear, are consistent, are transparent. And so that gets to that final vision statement on the right, which is really the guiding statement as I see it for our vision, right? We want to be community driven, we want to be cooperatively funded, and we want to be transparently governed. What does that mean? So it means, first and foremost, the open source community is at the core. We are engaging an active participatory group of educators and solution providers who want to figure out how to use what they're already managing for more purposes than it might have initially been collected for. In terms of being cooperatively funded, for many, many years, CEDS has moved forward because NCES has kept putting money into this because we have budget and legislative authority to spend on cooperative, collaborative standards. And the key there is cooperative. So how do we find more people? How do we know this is really working? We've gotten a lot of foundation interest. We got a lot of interest from primarily K-12 state education agencies first, but then the local school districts, post-secondary institutions, in not just using the standard, but contributing back. And that's what you've been hearing from Dwayne, what you've been hearing from Emily, is that next level of, okay, the standard is helpful, but I need to do X. How can we engage and help the standard evolve to the point that it gets to X. When we talk about cooperatively funded, that's not just a money investment. It's time, it's coding, it's helping teach, it's doing sessions like this. I look forward to the day that a CEDS masterclass is not taught just by those of us from NCES and the people on the CEDS team who've been driving things, but we've got a variety of partners and users, and people are helping the standard grow and expand, and we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely getting there. So in terms of its governance, you know, the federal government is always going to have a role. I think NCS is always going to have a role because of the collaborative, cooperative system that we've tried to develop. The Forum for Education Statistics has been a key part of this. We partner with other groups like the Council for Chief State School Officers. We want to keep expanding. What other partnerships should be part of this? And how do we make sure that governance model is transparent? Because this all comes back to the title of our session. The cornerstone of CEDS is you, those of you out in the field at an organization doing the educating, and the data you have to manage and work with every single day to make sure education is improving. This is a community. We want to keep it growing, and we want to keep discovering more ways that it can be more valuable to more and more educators and education organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it's been valuable and is showing increasing value to us at the U.S. Department of Education, specifically on that side of collecting data. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kelly Worthington, who's going to share a little bit about what we're doing within EdFacts to modernize systems, thinking about and keeping common education data standards at the core. So thank you. Take it away, Kelly. Thank you, Ross. And you can go to my next slide there. Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to start with just mentioning what is EdFacts. I was really pleased to see that there are so many of you who responded to that first survey question, identifying yourselves as either novice or apprentice on Common Ed data standards. So I'm guessing some of you have no idea what EdFacts is. And EdFacts is a data collection, it's a centralized data collection tool that we are using in the Department of Ed. And just briefly, we're almost at 20 years ago now, we started an initiative to say, we've got many, many data collection tools that we're using within the department. We've got different standards, different instructions, different forms. And this is back when we were still receiving some data collections by a fax that was submitted to the department to individual offices. We had states that were not submitting, grantees who were not submitting any data, and there was no accountability for that. So EdFacts was put in place partly to ensure that operationally we were doing things efficiently, that if we had 10 different grant programs that were all using enrollment data, that we were collecting enrollment data one time with one set of definitions that was going to then be used 10 different times within the Department of Ed. Decreasing reporting burden was a big part of that. But right now we have about 80 different data files that we are collecting through EdFacts that meet formula reporting requirements for grant programs for individuals with disabilities, grant programs under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that's neglected, delinquent, migrant, all the assessment data, graduation data, basic information about schools like Common Core of data. So just as a foundation there, that's what EdFacts is, centralized data collection tool. We have a modernization effort that's going on right now, and it's for this system. The system is over 15 years old right now, and the operations are over 15 years old. And a big part of what we are changing right now is just the operations of how we are using data. We are getting much quicker about using data than we did in the past. And that's a big part of where Common Ed data standards comes in. That when we were collecting data that was 2 and 3 years old, frankly, we didn't have a lot of data use, or we had data use that was kind of for a very, very targeted audience. The data that we're collecting now, I believe, is more relevant to our users. We are getting many, many more questions from data users, from the press, than we did in the past. We are looking at data quality at a different level than we did in the past. When I think of Common Ed data standards, and Ross mentioned that we've struggled within the federal offices to get a good understanding of what it means. How does it operationalize? How does it impact each office? I really the CEDS really captured my attention when we started with the Generate tool.
And we found, and the way I describe Generate, it's an application of Common Ed data standards. States had to have a good connection with had to have good foundation with Common Ed data standards to be able to implement Generate. Every single state that implemented that had an improvement in the data quality, which impacted our ability to use the data. And that was such a powerful conversation that we were having, is what's different here about this group of states? What's different about being able to answer data quality questions, the explanations about data quality? And that in turn also impacted how the department was defining reporting requirements, how we were answering data quality questions that we were getting from states. And I apologize, I need to take a drink. I've got a cold I've been struggling with for the last week. So improving those reporting requirements, that's one of the core foundations of EdFacts, is making sure we have clear reporting requirements. Excuse me. I want to talk just a little bit about the roles. What role does the federal office play compared to what the other stakeholders play with Common Ed data standards? Excuse me. We have related roles. We do not have the same roles in our data. Common Ed data standards, we're using user groups to talk about how states are putting together data for neglected and delinquent, and putting together data for assessment reporting requirements. That has been so informative as the federal agency has been kind of sitting in and listening in on those conversations to realize there are things that we are doing and defining and providing context around or providing guidance around that may not be as clear as it needs to be, because it's having an effect on what states are able to do to put together data and submit to the department. So it's what you are doing to influence Common Ed data standards is having an impact on what the program offices are doing as they're looking at their definition, as they're looking at what really are we asking for and why are we asking for this information in the context of all the different parts and pieces that need to come together to be reported to the department. Excuse me. The what's next portion for EdFacts and our modernization, one of the things we're working on right now are the connections and making sure that we've got clear definition of what is it that's required for the reporting, so that you're able to use those connections. Eventually, we will be incorporating Common Ed data standards in our information collection packages. You may hear those called OMB packages, the things that we put out for public comment every 3 years that says, this is the data that's required from each grantee for each grant program to be reported to the department. So we anticipate incorporating Common Ed data standards and OMB packages and in our annual technical reporting requirements. We're not quite there yet, but that's where we're heading. So I apologize for my voice here. I have been fascinated by Common Ed data standards, and I hope that those of you who do feel like you are real novices will stick around long enough to really get an understanding of what are the benefits, because the efficiencies that people have identified and described to us through the use of Common Ed data standards, and where I see that heading and being able to use the data well to understand what's happening with the kids that we serve. I'm excited about the future potential of it, and recognizing that it's something that will take a long time for us to fully incorporate, but I'm excited about the potential there. So with that, Jim, I think I'm gonna pass it on over to you. Obviously, we will be available here for questions later, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kelly. What a commitment. I had to take several drinks on your behalf during that. So thank you, despite the challenges with speaking, for jumping in and sharing that. It's important work, and I hope that all of you who are participating, as we've heard from the Ross and Kelly at the Department of Education, see that the commitment the department has in ensuring that Common Education data standards is supporting the needs of the field, and at the same time improving the processes and the quality of data and ability to use that data to understand what's happening in education. It's just impressive, their partnership and engagement in this work. So I'm going to talk real briefly about the roadmap of activities that are on the docket for CEDS as we wrap up 2022 here and go into the next year of 2023. I'm just going to call out a couple of things on here to point out, and this information will be available to you all so that you can have it and look at it later. But if you drop down on that first 2022 Q4 column there at the very bottom, one of the new things that will be released is CEDS campus guidance. It's something that has come out of the post-secondary conversations we've had in terms of how to capture and identify what is a campus, whether that's a location, a branch, a site. So pretty excited about the work that's happened there and the information that will be coming out related to how CEDS can support some of those post-secondary conversations. And then if we go over to the next column and all the way up at the very top, as mentioned before, version 11 of CEDS will soon be released in Q1 in the February timeframe. And so that's something that you all can look forward to. Along with that release will be release notes that identify what's changed, what's new, if there's anything that's been deprecated, and all of that will come out in version 11 will be directly from all of those processes that Dwayne talked about earlier and stakeholders like yourselves who have come to the table and said, here's some things that need to be impacted within the standards. So we're looking forward to that. You see just underneath that, accompanied with that version 11 release will also be the reflected releases in the integrated data store artifacts, as well as the data warehouse version. Those will be updated as well. I'm going to go over 2 more columns to Q3 of 2023, something we're very excited about and is referenced a couple of times on this webinar, is the CEDS ontology. So looking at that JSON artifacts that are currently under development within the JSON working group. You can look down under work groups there and see that those are happening every other Thursday. And there's been links provided in the chat for you to be able to go access and join those discussions. But that CEDS ontology and that JSON work is new and emerging within the standards body here and is very exciting and very important work. It's going to open up entirely new connections as we move forward into the future. And then looking at the generate releases that's been talked about and the stakeholder plans and what's on the roadmap for that. We did drop in the chat a link to look up and go find information on generate if that's a new term for you. But you can see here there are several planned releases of generate, including a 6.0 release in Q3 of 2023. Perfect. Yeah, we'll get to that question in just a moment. And so you can see the generate releases that are coming. And one of the things that is important, I think, for us to point out with each one of these releases for the generate application, that's the physical implementation of CEDS and its supporting states as they work towards improved reporting to EDFACS, is for each release, there is then the subsequent open office hours. I highly encourage any of the stakeholders that are interested in Generate or are in fact using Generate for each of those releases. That's a great opportunity to get with the technical team and the program team to really understand what has changed, what's in this release and how it impacts you and your work on the ground. And then finally, I'll point out at the very bottom, the stakeholder plans. There is something called the Generate Governance Group. This was formed by a handful of states early on and as the Generate tool is being implemented more widely in the states as a mechanism for stakeholders who are implementing the tool to be able to voice and articulate their desires for improvement of the tool or where it should go next. So a lot of really great things have come from the Generate Governance Group. It's a place for you to engage if you are a stakeholder who is interested in or using Generate to help shape and inform the future of that tool. So those are just a couple of the things highlighting here in terms of the roadmap for where CEDS is going. And each and every one of these that are defined here, again, just circling back to hit on the theme, are a result of stakeholders in the field like yourselves, identifying the priority areas and the needs for support that you have as it relates to education data. With that, Nancy, I'm going to turn back to you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to get to your question now, Marjorie. So what Marjorie's asking about is you'll notice in 2023 Q1 through Q4, it says new domain work group. A little clarification here. First of all, it's not to create a new domain. It is a new domain work group. So just want to make sure that that's clear. The domain work groups, what they are is, as we mentioned earlier, we've had a post-secondary one, we've had an early learning one. And as you noticed very early on in the session today, when we showed the history of CEDS, that they were added over time. We have had elements added to every domain over time, but we are trying to do kind of a cycle, if you will, and ensure that we are taking a very close look at particular domains to make sure that are there elements from the other domains. For instance, when we looked at post-secondary, we took a look at what elements were in early learning, K-12, adult ed, and career and technical education to see if any of those elements applied to the post-secondary domain and could be added there. We also took a look at external resources. So in the case of post-secondary work group, we looked at PESC and their standards, as well as EdFi's teacher prep data model and what they had put together to see if any of those elements were not yet in CEDS and could we incorporate them into CEDS. So that's kind of what the domain work groups work on. We did post-secondary in 2019. We started it in fall of 2019. We did it through 2020. In 2021, we had a work group. We took a little break from the domain work groups, and instead we had a work group around researchers and how to use CEDS. And there's information out there about that. And then in 2022, as we mentioned earlier, we had the early learning work group. So actually coming up in the next few weeks, we will be providing an invitation and an announcement about which domain we will be looking at next. Please note that we don't typically, or we have not yet had one around K-12 because, as we mentioned very early on, K-12 was the very first part of the CEDS standard. So we have the most contact and touch points with folks in the K-12 space. And we've been working to expand that through to early learning through the early learning work group and the work that they have done, to post-secondary and the work they have done. So we'll be determining and announcing whether our new work group will be career and technical education, adult education, or workforce. So you can look for that announcement. It should be coming out around middle of December-ish for a January start date. So you can look for that information. Okay, at this time, feel free to drop in the chat any questions. The way the webinar is set up, you can't come off mute, so apologies there. But we do welcome all of your questions, so feel free to drop those in. In the meantime, we are going to actually go to the CEDS website, and I'm going to let Emily navigate to that for us. Because we do have quite a few folks on here that are novices. We want to make sure that you're kind of aware. We've dropped a lot of different links in the chat and different sites and how does this all relate kind of thing. So this is the basic, right? It's ceds.ed.gov. And I think Emily's about to drop that in the chat for you. But this is the basic. You can do almost anything on this site without having an account. Okay, the only thing that you need an account for is if, as I mentioned way early in the presentation, if you want to create your own aligned map where you're mapping your data dictionary to CEDS, or if you want to develop your own connection. Thank you, Francis. If you want to develop your own connection where you can detail out how to answer a question or a metric or a reporting requirement, that sort of thing. If you want to take a look at what others have done, you can do that without an account. So everything we're going to show you right now is without Emily being logged in or anything. So the first thing I want to talk about is if you go under the Explore CEDS, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for half a second. If you go to Explore CEDS, right there in the middle of the first page, for all of you novices, this is going to provide you information about the various pieces and parts. And you can go ahead and click on that, Emily. The various pieces and parts of CEDS and what it's made up of. Along the left-hand side of this graphic, you will notice that there are a number of roles. And on the right-hand side are the different tools with CEDS. you can click on, and you don't have to do it, Emily, but you can click on any of those circles and it will expand below explaining it. So in the case of IT developers, it'll explain more about how IT developers can use CEDS, data stewards, researchers, etc. On the right-hand side, if you click on the CEDS community, it'll provide you that website. If you click on Align or Connect or the elements or whatever, it'll provide you links to those particular items, as well as kind of what are they, right? So it's going to provide you that information. So if you are brand new to CEDS, this is probably where you want to start, as well as there's a video in the top right hand corner that gives you, I think it's like a 2.5 to 5 minute video that provides you a little synopsis of what is CEDS. So this is a great place to start for those of you that are new here. If you go under the green toolbar at the top under Elements, you will find that there are 3 options for viewing the standard. All right. The first one is the domain entity schema, and this is probably my favorite because this is the contextual version of the standard. And so if you want to go there, Emily, it's going to have, it has kind of folders. It's a tree view, if you will. And this has all of the domains listed that are in CEDS. So we talked about them earlier, the early learning, K-12, post-secondary, career and technical ed, etc., including all the way down to implementation variables and authentication and authorization. As you open each of those folders, you're going to drill down further and further into it, and until you get to an actual element. And so Emily's going to do that now. You can pick any one you want. All right. And then if you click on that element name, this is where it's going to provide you details on the element. So this is where you will see that there is a definition and there's an option set if one is necessary. You can also see there that there's a number, it says related domains and entities and categories. That's all the places in the CEDS domain entity schema where this element resides. So these are all the different instances. Of course, birth date is like on every potential person available. So you're going to see a number of those related domains, entities, and categories. And then below that, you'll see related topics. Those are use cases on why this element was added to CEDS. So birth date is a pretty easy one, right? I mean, we can all envision where that might be used. And these are just some of those. But on some of the more unique elements that we may have, or that drill down into more specific information, it's nice sometimes to see those related topics, kind of where did this come from? Why was this added to CEDS kind of information? The other nice thing about CEDS elements, at the very bottom, you'll see a URL. Every element has a unique URL. And if you are having conversations about CEDS and using those elements or talking about the elements, as we mentioned before in the early learning work group with the teen parent, kind of thinking through things and really talking about what exists already there versus what we might need to add. These URLs are so helpful. Trust me. We have had plenty of conversations back and forth with our work groups where we have sent, wait, what about this element? I think this one would work. And having that hyperlink instead of having to go find the exact name is so useful. So I always like to be sure to point out that URL. Okay, Emily, you can close that. The other thing I want to note on here before you move away from this screen, Emily, is you'll notice under demographic where she has the list of elements showing, they are not in alphabetical order. Rather, they are contextual. So if they were in alphabetical order, birth date, of course, would still be first. Oh, no, excuse me, it would not. American Indian or Alaskan Native would be first, followed by Asian, then birth date, then Black or African American. So you can see how it would kind of flip-flop around. And that's very hard to try to find what you're looking for if it's in there alphabetically. So instead, it's listed here contextually so that you'll notice that, for instance, all the races and ethnicity, they go together. The birth date is up at the top. You'll also notice that if you were looking under someone's name, it will go first name, middle initial, last name, as opposed to going alphabetically there. This is really helpful, and I point it out because it takes a minute to get used to as you're first coming to CEDS, but just give it a minute and then you'll be glad it is set up contextually, because when you're looking at particular elements and then you're trying to figure out, are there other elements that are similar to it or that might have something better? It's nice to have them ordered contextually so that you can see right around that set of elements what else might be applicable. So wanted to be sure and show you that. The other options under the elements, and you don't have to go there, Emily, is that you can search alphabetically. That's that middle option. And then you can download as an Excel file, which is that third option when we were on the elements screen. The other piece that I want to be sure to show you is under tools. We did talk about Align and Connect just a little bit. In the next masterclass, we are going to talk about them a good deal more. So if you'll just click very briefly on Align, Connect is set up exactly the same way. It's going to be 3 columns: build, use, and learn. On the build, that's where you're going to need a user account. Okay, so if you want to create a map, you're going to need that user account. If you want to create a connection, you're going to need it. Under the use, that's where you can explore what's already available publicly. So you can click on those. There's different ways. In this particular case, the first one is that you start with who created the map. So what state is it? Is it a K-12 map, a post-secondary, whatever? And then you'll drill down to what the element name, what the map name is, and then you can compare the elements across maps. In the second option there, you're going to do the reverse. You'll start with, I'm interested in this particular CEDS element, and I want to see who has aligned to that element so I can see how they've defined it. So that's kind of the concept there. So those are the use. And then the learn side, 2 things want to make sure that you really note on this, on both Align and Connect. The first one there is that there are tutorials. So if you're getting started and you're not sure how to do any of it, the CEDS team is available to provide demonstrations for you. But if you want to do this on your own, we do have video tutorials. They're broken up in, they're between 10 and 15 minutes each, but they're broken up into sections according to what you might be doing. That way you can go and find the particular piece you need help on and watch that video. And then finally on this page, I want to talk about the mapping toolkit. If you decide to map or align your data dictionary to CEDS, it's very helpful if you kind of know where to get started, and that's this mapping toolkit. It will take you through step by step how to do things, kind of what order. It also provides a level of effort there. So what does it really take to map, that kind of thing. So all of that is available to you. All right, now if we can go back to the home screen. And if you will scroll down just a little bit to that, perfect. We talked earlier today, it's been mentioned several times, we have 2 other ways that you interact with CEDS. The first on the screen there is GitHub, and we're going to go to it in just a second, just to remind you of what it is. But it's GitHub. That's where all those repositories live. That's where you submit your suggestions, your changes, those proposals that Dwayne talked about. All of that goes to GitHub. That's the open source community, or OSC. In addition to that, we have a way to interact with you all as stakeholders through the calendar, discussion threads. We have sometimes held our work group documentation there, but it's called Community 360. That's really the platform for it. So it's the CEDS community. So if Emily, if you can go to C360 and then so as Emily mentioned earlier, you do not have to log in to see much of the information. Now, if you want to interact, so if you want to respond to a discussion thread, if you are a part of a work group and the work group page is stood up here, then you will need an account, which is very simple. It's a username, email address, I think is all it is. And then we'll approve you and you have access. But if you want to see the calendar, which is down there towards the bottom, you can easily see that. You can interact with it, move it to another month, whatever you might need. Each of those that Emily was just showing there, the upcoming events, you can click on those. Those will have the links so that you can get into the meeting. So if you're interested in particular in attending the JSON work group meeting, you can click on it. There will be a link for that actual meeting, and then you can go and attend the meeting. And then we do want to very quickly up at the top show you how to get to those newsletters. And so it's right at the top. I mean, it literally just says newsletters. It's right there. So you can see all the past issues. We do put them out about quarterly. So another one will be coming out around January. And then finally, we do have, it's called the Public Domain Clearinghouse, or PDC. And so if you go to collaborate and then go down to documents, again, this is without logging in, so you can get to all this information. Usually, maybe you have to log in for I didn't think you had to log in for the PDC. But there will be documentation. So the campus guidance that Jim mentioned that is coming out will be there in just a minute. We're going to post a link to a new resource. Oh, thank you, Emily. There we go. The timeline, we had that timeline at the beginning of the presentation. So that is available there. So you can find that. And other documentation that you'll be able to find there. Okay. Finally, we want to go to GitHub, which again is available from ceds.ed.gov. There's a link over to it. As Emily mentioned, there are 5 repositories. Want to just talk briefly about each of those. So the integrated data store is the first one. The integrated data store is CEDS's integrated data store, and it is available free for you. So you go and you grab it, you download it, and then you can use it in your system, in your network. All right. The second one that we want to talk about are the elements. And this is the one Emily used as the example, but Emily, if you could just click on it anyway, this is how you submit those tickets. And if you can just click issues, just so folks can kind of see what it looks like to see the issues. You can see here, these are all the things right now that have been added. And there's 371 that are open, so there's quite a bit out there, but a number of them are about to be moved into version 11. And so this is where you can come and you can comment on any one of these that folks have submitted. These are submitted by users like yourself, and you come here and you just you can review what they have put in there as their suggestion. This is a new element, or I think that this particular CEDS element should be added to another place in CEDS, whatever it might be. You can respond to that. Yes, I agree, or have you thought about this? Whatever you might want to say. This is also where you can come and say, hey, I want to be part of your work group. I'm really interested in this particular element or the topic around this element or whatever, and you can say that you're interested, and they'll receive that information. So I just wanted, or you can submit your own brand new issue up at the top there. So just wanted to make sure everyone saw that one. And then if you'll go back to the main page, the collaborative exchange, this is one of our newer repositories. And this is where code has been developed by you all as stakeholders and is provided for others to use. So we have had a data warehouse expansion process where we had a work group that really worked through some data around school finance. We've had it around adult education. And as part of that data warehouse expansion process, the stakeholders are writing code so that they can pull the data from the data warehouse and it's ready and already doing calculations and things so that it can be put into a nice, pretty report. That's where you can share this, because if I'm using CEDS and you're using the CEDS data warehouse, then we can write the same script, even though it's on our own data, and we only have to write it once, right? So it's a way to be active within the community and to provide back to the community. And then, yes, the data warehouse itself, I keep mentioning the data warehouse. Of course, that's our reporting data warehouse. So you can come there. We are always looking for new use cases on developing that out further. And as Dwayne mentioned earlier, we are more than happy to help you kind of walk through that. What is that process like? And continue to build out the data warehouse so that it is useful for everyone. And then finally, we have the data warehouse Parquet. So this was a recent addition thanks to the state of Maine. And they actually built out, with the help of their solution provider, Cedar Labs, they built out the CEDS data warehouse into Parquet files. So if that is something that you are using in your own system, then it is available in this way now. So those are the 3 different sites, but they all relate together. And so again, you can view them all from the ceds.ed.gov. The links are right there to get you to them, so you don't have to memorize all these different websites or anything like that. Okay, and then finally, I'll take it back over, Emily. All right. And I have not seen any questions come in while we were talking. So if you do have questions, we have just a few minutes left and we'd be more than happy to take your questions. While you're thinking of those and getting those in, we do want to give a plug for the next masterclass. This one, as we talked about, was all about kind of the history of CEDS. How do you get involved? The next masterclass, which I'm actually going to drop a link to the registration. The next masterclass is Behind Every Informed Data User is a Great CEDS Tech Stack. We've talked a little bit about Align Connect, the integrated data store, data warehouse, Parquet, JSON, all this stuff. So in that particular masterclass, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on that. But then it's really kind of split into thirds. So a third of the session will be about what are those things. The second third will be that we will provide you different ways that you can implement CEDS, right? So there's kind of no wrong way to do it. So providing you, what does that look like architecturally? So we'll provide that information. And then in the last portion of that webinar, we will be going through challenges that states face. There's a number of challenges there. While the specifics may be unique to your state or provider or institution or wherever you might be from, the overall challenge is pretty universal a lot of times. And so we're going to be going through some of those universal challenges and how CEDS might help, where you could find assistance through CEDS, whether it's through the tools or the data warehouse or the standard itself or whatever that might be. So we're looking forward to that one. That's going to be on December 1st. And then the last one is going to be on December 8th. And I'm going to drop the link to that registration in the chat now. And that particular one is CEDS in real life. So at that session, we're going to actually have a couple of states that are going to talk about how they've been using CEDS. Why are they using it? What does it really take? What is that level of effort that's necessary to use it? So you know what to expect. And then they're also going to be talking about how they are helping to further CEDS along. I mentioned Maine developed the Parquet files. These particular states have been developing some other pieces for CEDS. So really, how does the stakeholder not only interact with CEDS, but how do you move it along in the way that's necessary? So we're really excited about that. At the end of that session, we will have kind of a town hall. We have about 20 minutes, I think, set aside for questions. So if you're participating in each of these master classes, be thinking about what are those questions that you might have, and then we'll have time set aside that we can really dive into what those questions might be. So with that, I do want to thank everyone for coming. And I also promised earlier that I would provide you a link to a resource document. Let me put that up. So you can go there, and the resource document kind of has all these links that we've been, well, it doesn't have generate because I unfortunately was not anticipating putting the generate link in there, but all the other links that we've been dropping in the chat, it does have those. So if you have any questions, as we mentioned before, you can email us at ceds@ed.gov. You can reach out to us. We will be happy to provide any technical assistance that we can, demonstrations, explanations, whatever that might be. And I do want to take a moment and just thank our presenters, Dwayne, Emily, Jim, Ross, and Kelly. We appreciate it. And all of us appreciate all of you and your participation in CEDS, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.